He was a forgotten one, the last child left standing after the others were claimed, his bare feet caked with dust, his arms wrapped protectively around a tiny infant. The crowd that had once been eager for the auction now turned their heads, muttering, unwilling to meet his hollow gaze. No tears streaked his dirt-smudged face. No pleas escaped his lips. He simply stood there, silent and worn, like a soul too old for his years, maybe 8, perhaps 9, but carrying the weight of a lifetime. His hair hung in damp strands over his brow, and the rough planks beneath him groaned as he shifted, splinters biting his heels. The sun baked the ground, turned the air thick and tense, as if even the heat wanted the auction over. 10 children had been sold, some with pity, others with greed, but none had claimed this boy or the bundle he clutched. "Move it along," barked a man from the edge of the gathering, tipping back his bowler hat. "Ain't nobody paying for 2 when they only need 1. The words rippled through the onlookers, a chorus of agreement rising like the hum of flies over spoiled meat. The sheriff shifted uneasily, wiping sweat from his neck. He'd already stretched his conscience then allowing this to happen. But with the town's coffers empty and the orphanage burned to ash, there was no place left for these children. The church had no room. The townsfolk had no charity, so the auction block was all that remained. The auctioneer's voice cracked as he tried once more. "Name's Caleb, 9 years old. Baby brothers barely a fortnight. Both healthy. Strong lad, works hard, milks, chops wood, hauls water. Ain't worth spit with a squalling brat hanging off him," snapped a woman near the front. Caleb flinched but said nothing, drawing the baby tighter. The infant stirred but didn't cry, the eerie stillness unsettling the crowd. At the edge of it all stood a man, still as stone, dust clinging to the hem of his coat. His hands rested on a worn walking stick, his broad shoulders unmoving. Abram Cutter, a man who'd buried his wife beneath a hill of wildflowers, on land that hadn't known laughter since. He'd accepted long ago that he'd never hear a child call him father. But something about that boy, the way he stood, refusing to beg, refusing to hope, stirred something long dormant in Abram's heart. Without a word, Abram stepped forward. The crowd parted, startled. "I'll take him," he said simply. The auctioneer blinked. "Both." Abram nodded. "Both. I've got land, food, work that needs hands." He laid a crumpled bill on the table. "That enough?" The sheriff opened his mouth, but the auctioneer raised a hand, eyes softening. The gavel fell. It was done. Abram didn't wait for thanks or words. "Come on, son," he said, quiet now. Caleb hesitated, then stepped down, still barefoot, still holding his brother. They left the town behind, riding in silence, the dust of the trail rising behind them like ghosts. No questions were asked. No answers were given. The baby never made a sound. When they reached the gate to Abram's homestead, Caleb lifted his eyes for the first time, reading the faded letters carved above, Cutter Homestead, and beneath it, barely visible anymore, one word, Hope. Abram noticed. My wife named it that. Said every home ought to have some. Caleb didn't reply. Inside, the house was plain, sturdy, filled with shadows. Abram opened a door at the end of the hall. This was hers. Never used it since. A crib stood in the corner, blanket folded, dust swirling in the light. Caleb crossed the room, laid his brother down with a gentleness that made Abram's throat ache. The baby stirred, parted his lips, but stayed quiet. What's his name? Abram asked. Matthew, the boy whispered. And yours? Caleb. Abram nodded. You hungry? They ate biscuits and beans in silence. That night, Abram sat on the porch, pipe cold in his hand, listening. Inside, soft footsteps paced, Caleb checking on Matthew again and again. When the boy finally stepped outside, he asked, Is it always as quiet? Most nights. I don't like quiet. Me neither, Abram said, but you get used to it. For a long while, neither spoke. Then Caleb's voice, dry and hollow, broke the still. He hasn't cried since Ma died. Abram turned. She handed him to me through the window before the house fell. Hair was on fire. She didn't scream. Abram had no words. They said lightning. But I saw it. A torch. Someone said it. Abram didn't ask who. Didn't need to. The next morning, as dawn broke, Matthew's cry echoed through the house. Sharp, hungry, alive. Caleb rushed to him, trembling. Abram brought milk and bread, and for the first time he saw it, a flicker in Caleb's eyes. Not hope, not yet, but maybe the memory of it. Days passed. The ranch changed, not in the fences or the fields, but in the feel of it. Footsteps on the porch, voices in the kitchen, a baby's wail not of sorrow, but of life. Caleb worked hard, harder than any boy should, and never left Matthew's side. Does he ever sleep without you holding him? Abram asked once. No. You ever get tired? More tired when he's not near. That was answer enough. But the peace didn't last. One night, hooves on the trail, slow, deliberate, stopping at the gate. Abram stepped outside, rifle ready. A rider watched from the trees, then turned and disappeared into the dark. In the morning, nothing was said, but Abram kept Caleb close, taught him to oil hinges so doors didn't creak, to hide a knife in his boot without cutting himself, to see the signs of stranger passing. Finally, Caleb spoke. I saw him. Abram didn't pretend. The man? Caleb nodded. Why'd he do it? The boy's hands shook. Said Ma took something from him. She didn't. She just helped people. That made him mad. Did you tell the sheriff? He said there wasn't proof. No witnesses. No confession. No justice. His name? Eldon Rake. Abram felt ice in his veins. He knew the name. A man who made his fortune by driving others from theirs, who wore a badge he hadn't earned. And now he was back. He'll come again, Caleb said. Abram met his eyes. Then we'll be ready. And they prepared. Quiet, steady, side by side. He didn't face the danger like most would. No trembling, no talk of fear. He handled it the way a man might handle planting a field, because not doing so meant ruin. Late one night, after Matthew finally fell asleep in the old crib, Abram knelt by the hearth and lifted a small bundle from beneath the floorboards. Inside the oilcloth was a revolver and a tarnished badge that still caught the light when it turned. You were the law once? Caleb asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Abram stared at the badge for a long moment. Long time ago. Didn't make me much good at it. But I tried. Caleb's eyes flicked between the badge and the man. Why'd you stop? Because sometimes trying doesn't change a damn thing. They let the fire fill the silence. The next morning, Abram spotted a fence on the south side of the pasture. Slashed clean through. The tracks nearby weren't hidden. Heavy boots, moving with purpose. For men, maybe more. They didn't care to cover their trail. They wanted him to see. It was a message. Abram stood with the wind in his face, watching the distant ridge, listening to Matthew's cry from the house. Caleb called from the kitchen for breakfast, and Abram felt something stir in him he hadn't let himself feel since he laid his wife to rest. He was afraid, but not for himself. For them, for what he'd found when he thought he had nothing left. By sundown, they found a knife driven deep into the barn door, holding a scrap of paper. The scrawl was rough, the word simple. Give back what ain't yours, or we'll take it with fire. Caleb saw Abram reading. What's it mean? It means trouble's already here. Caleb's jaw clenched, but he didn't back away. I'm not leaving. I wouldn't let you, Abram said, tossing the paper into the flames. That night, long after Caleb and Matthew were asleep, Abram cleaned and checked every gun in the house. At first light, Abram sent a message by rider to an old friend, Warren Tate, a man he'd once ridden with, a man he trusted when trust was scarce. Trouble was coming, and Abram knew they had little time. But before the storm hit, there were small moments that mattered. Matthew took to crawling, dragging himself across the floor with surprising strength. Caleb laughed, real laughter, when a goat butted him off his feet. Abram caught himself humming while mending the porch steps, a tune that made Caleb pause and say, that was Ma's song. When thunder rolled over the hills one night, they sat together on the porch, Matthew asleep at their feet. The wind carried the smell of rain and pine. Abram's voice was low. What if I don't know how to do this? Do what? Be a father. Caleb didn't answer at first. Then, soft as a wind, Ma said you don't got to be good at loving. Just got to choose it, even when it's hard. Abram stared out at the dark and chose. By dawn, the land smelled of wet earth. Abram found the fence broken again, deliberate, calculated. From inside came the sound of Caleb's voice, steady and sure, reading aloud from the Bible, his finger tracing each word, his mouth working through the ones he hadn't mastered yet. Matthew's cries followed, and for a moment, Abram felt a kind of peace. Then came the rider, fast through the mud and puddles. Warren's horse was near spent when it reached the gate. Warren half fell from the saddle, breath ragged, eyes sharp, smoke near Butte Trail. He said once inside, dripping rain onto the floor, homestead burned clean. Not bandits, not wild men, controlled, careful, rake. Warren nodded grimly. Him. 6, maybe more, riding with him. Says he's collecting debts and squatters, but it's a lie. Just take it what he wants. No law to stop him. No law left. Abram stared out at the hills, at the land he'd worked, the home he'd rebuilt with his own hands. How long? Not long, Warren said. A day, maybe less. Why is he after us? Caleb asked. Because you survived, Abram said. And because men like him can't stand to see what they try to break still standing. They spent the day readying the house. Warren barred the doors, nailed iron across the shutters. Abram checked the weapons, set traps, taught Caleb where to hide the knives, how to run if he had to. Matthew's fussing filled the air, the sound better than any silence. That night, Abram and Warren waited in the barn sharpening blades. You sure about this? Warren asked. Ain't never been sure, Abram said. But I know what matters. The morning mist lay heavy when the riders came. Dogs with them. Not for company, but to hunt. Abram told Caleb, if it turns bad, take Matthew. Get through the cellar. Follow the ravine. Don't look back till you see the tracks. I'm not leaving you. You will, Abram said, voice firm. That's what fathers ask. When the rider stopped at the gate, Rake's voice rang out. Cutter, let's end this like men. Abram stepped onto the porch, shotgun across his arm. Rake smirked. Could have been somebody, Cutter. Could have owned this valley. Instead, you're guarding strays. Abram met his eyes. Still breathing. Still free. Rake's grin vanished. Not for long. The first shot cracked the air, Warren's, clean through one man's shoulder. The yard exploded into gunfire. Dogs charged at Scatterwind Caleb. Hidden at the window, threw down a jar of live powder that burst in their faces. Abram fired into the dirt, driving men behind cover. In the chaos, Rake charged, pistol drawn. Abram met him at the center of the yard, and they went down hard, fists in fury, mud and blood. Abram felt the man's breath hot on his face, felt the weight of every year and every loss. But when he rose, rifle but in hand, Rake lay still in the dirt. Warren climbed down from the loft, limping, blood on his sleeve. Is it done? Caleb asked from the porch, Matthew in his arms. Abram wiped his mouth, tasted iron, and looked to where the sun crested the hills. No, he said, it's just starting. They buried the dead at the North Ridge. Simple graves, no markers. Warren said it was a mistake, that men like Rake should be left with the crows. But Abram didn't care. Right was right, even in war. When Warren rode out on the third day, the land was quiet, but not at peace. Abram knew better than to trust the stillness. He watched the hills at dusk, but inside, he listened to the sound that anchored him. Caleb's voice, low and sure, reading to Matthew, teaching him the names of things worth remembering. The man gave a slow nod as his friend mounted up. I'll return, Warren promised, his eyes lingering on the house. Abram gave him a steady look. Thank you. Warren's gaze shifted toward the porch where Caleb stood. That boy, he's going to grow into something strong. He already has, Abram replied. Their hands met in a firm grip, the kind shared between men who looked death in the face before and knew better than to waste words on what couldn't be said. Then Warren rode out, swallowed by the trees and morning mist, leaving the Cutter place quiet once more. The days that followed didn't rush by, nor did they drag. They simply filled up with life. New fences went up. The vegetable garden spread wider. Caleb decided they should keep bees. So he and Abram built a hive box and carried it to where the wildflowers grew thickest. Caleb worked hard, balancing Matthew on one hip while hauling buckets or patching the chicken coop. Abram offered to take the load from him at times, but mostly he just watched as a boy became a man without waiting for permission, watched as a brother raised his brother, watched as a life he'd never expected took shape around them both. Then one evening, everything shifted again. It started with hooves on the road, but not like before. No stealth, no threat. A wagon came into view, moving slow and careful. From it climbed a woman, weathered by years, with hands worn from work. Beside her was a boy, maybe 12, holding a rifle but keeping it pointed down. They walked to the house, and Abram stepped off the porch to meet them. "Can I help you?" he asked. "Name's Marion Holt," the woman said. "This here's my grandson, James. We heard about what happened. About Rake, his men, the fires. We farm out near Dry Creek. Knew your wife once, long ago." Abram's jaw tensed at the name. Marion raised a hand. "We're not here to ask for anything, just to thank you for standing your ground when no one else would." Caleb stepped forward, Matthew in his arms. Marion's gaze softened as she took in the boys. "They yours?" "They are," Abram said without pause. She smiled, small but sincere. "Then you're doing right." That night, they shared a meal and talked of simple things, fields, weather, which creeks hadn't dried up yet. Nothing that reopened old hurts. When Marion and James left the next morning, she turned at the edge of the yard. There'll be more folks coming. People without homes or kin, but willing to work. They'll need a place. "I've got fences to mend," was all Abram said. But she understood, and come they did. Drifters with calloused hands and tired eyes. Widows, war-worn men. Families carry more hopes than belongings. They brought seeds, tools, promises. One man offered 2 mules and swore he'd dig a well that would never run dry. Abram let them stay, not to build a town, but because he knew what it felt like to have nowhere else to go. Cabins rose along the ridge. Gardens sprouted. A schoolhouse took shape from scraps and determination. Caleb was its first student, pencil in hand, Matthew resting quietly beside him. Nights glowed with lamplight and the sound of voices. One day Caleb called Abram Papa. No ceremony, no hesitation, just as natural as rain on the roof. The word hit Abram harder than any bullet ever could. He hadn't expected it. He wasn't sure he deserved it. But when it came again the next day, and the next, he learned to answer. One evening, as they worked in the barn, Caleb leaned against the stall. "Ma would have liked it here," he said. Abram paused. "You talk about her much?" "When Matthew's asleep, I tell him stories. She'd be proud of you." "You think so?" "I know so." The warmth and the quiet between them was as steady as the heart's glow. But peace doesn't last. It was nearly dark when a rider came hard up the trail, young, wild-eyed, his clothes torn. "They're coming," he gasped. "What's left of Rake's men. They've hired bounty hunters. Brought chains." "How many?" Abram asked. "More than we've got bullets." Abram nodded once. "Then we don't face it alone." He sent word that night, messages carried by hand, by horse, to every family that had made their home on his land. He didn't beg for help. He told the truth. If they came for him, they'd come for them all. And one by one they came. Lanterns flickered in the night. Men and women, old and young, with what weapons they had. Axes, pitchforks, ancient rifles, iron resolve. By dawn, 27 stood ready. Abram faced them. No speech. No promises. "This is our place now," he said. "We don't give it up." Heads nodded. That was enough. Then the dust rose on the horizon, and with it came the riders. 30 or more, hard men on hard horses. Faces marked by scars, or empty of anything human. At their head rode a man Abram didn't know. A bounty hunter dressed in black. Death on his belt. Chains clinking at his saddle. Abram stood tall on the ridge. Caleb at his side. Matthew safe below in the root cellar. The settlers formed a line, scattered but ready. The bounty hunter reined in, voice cold. "You're keeping what don't belong to you. Step aside." "They belong to me now," Abram answered, his voice low but firm. "This ends in blood." "If it must," Abram said, "but it won't be theirs." A heartbeat of silence. Then chaos. Gunfire cracked. A rider fell. Dirt flew. Rocks and fists in fury. Abram fired, dropped a man. Caleb handed rifles. Steady and sure. Warren's long rifle spoke from the high ground. The bounty leader waited, watching, until the fight began to turn. Then he rode in. He dismounted, guns out, cold and fast. "Drop it," he said, aiming at Abram, "or the boy dies." Abram didn't flinch. "You fire," he said. "You don't walk away." The hunter smiled, empty of all but hunger. Then a cry rose. Matthew's, loud as thunder, strong as life. The bounty man hesitated. Abram didn't. The rifle came up. The shot rang out. The hunter fell. The rest fled. When the dust settled, Abram sank onto the porch, blood from his shoulders staining his shirt. Caleb knelt beside him, trembling but safe. Matthew cried again, and the sound was sweeter than any song. They buried the fallen as the sun sank low. 3 of their own, including Mary and Holt. James stood alone at her grave until Caleb took his hand. That night, by the fire, Abram held Matthew close. "We didn't win," Caleb said quietly. "No," Abram agreed, "but we endured, and sometimes that's enough." Caleb leaned against him, warm and safe. "Why'd you take us in?" Abram looked down at the boy's wide, wondering eyes. "Because I've been empty too long," he said, "and I didn't want to be any more." "Papa," Caleb whispered, and Abram, heart full, answered him. "I reckon she wouldn't have minded," Abram said quietly, swallowing the lump that rose in his throat. "Who?" Caleb asked. "Abigail, your ma." Abram's voice was soft but steady. "No, son, I don't think she would have minded at all." The weeks that followed brought changes no one could have foreseen. The Cutter place began to feel like it was no longer broken. The fences stood tall again. The barn stood firm, and the little schoolhouse finally had glass in its windows to catch the sunrise. Families who'd sought shelter stayed, some settling close, others moving on but carrying the memory of what they'd seen there, the proof that true strength wasn't born of anger or weapons, but of love and the will to protect what mattered. And at the heart of it, Abram Cutter became something he'd never expected. A father. He wasn't flawless. He still kept to himself, still had a hard time finding a smile. But when he saw Caleb working the land or heard Matthew's laughing out across the porch, something inside him felt a little less hollow. The past still whispered from the shadows, but light now spilled into those places too. Each morning, as the wind stirred the scent of fresh-cut grass and pine, Abram would close his eyes and murmur 3 simple words. "Thank you, Lord." The season shifted. The hills turned the color of fire, rust and gold tumbling down the valley until the trees stood bare. The chill came early, the kind that cracked skin and frosted windows before the sun could even rise. But that autumn, the land gave generously. Baskets of squash stacked high, corn heavy on the stalk, potatoes packed deep in cellars that had once hidden children from death's door. Matthew was growing quick, crawling fast enough to vanish if you blinked. His laughter echoed through the house, always followed by the thud of Caleb chasing him down. Caleb was changing too. Taller, yes, but more than that. His walk had purpose. His eyes held more understanding. He read now in the evenings, scripture history, stories of battles and kings. And when he wasn't reading, he was fixing, building, planning, helping Abram before the need was spoken. Abram often found himself watching a boy who'd walked into his life with nothing but a baby and quiet determination, the boy who now called him Papa as naturally as drawing breath. At night, once Caleb had gone to bed, Abram would sit by the fire and whisper a prayer, not asking for more, not begging for safety, just offering thanks. "I don't know why you gave them to me," he'd say, "but I'll carry them as long as I'm able." But in that part of the world, peace was never a promise. The first sign came as a ribbon of smoke on the far ridge, spotted by Warren Tate. He'd settled nearby, always willing with his rifle. "Someone's moving through," Warren said as he rode hard into the yard. "Not one of ours. And they got wagons, big ones." Abram took up his rifle at once. That night, he and Caleb followed the tracks. Deep grooves cut where no wagon should have dared travel. They found what was left by the moon's pale light, a burned-out wagon, its canvas shredded, a child's doll lying in the dust, one arm missing. Blood darkened the stones, though no bodies remained. "They didn't just pass through," Caleb whispered. "No," Abram said. "They were hunted." By dawn, a girl no older than 14 stumbled onto the Cutter land, half-starved, clothes torn, one shoe missing. She collapsed into Warren's arms, too weak to speak. When words finally came, they were broken and soft. "Ellie, my name's Ellie." Her family had been bound west, drawn by stores of land that welcomed those with nowhere else to go. But they met a man in a gray coat, his boots iron-tipped. "Said we didn't belong," she whispered. "Said he'd make an example." Abram carried her inside and tended her wounds. When the sun rose, he'd made up his mind. They wouldn't wait for trouble anymore. They'd face it head-on. He rode east, gathering those who still believed in the promise of that place. Warren headed for supplies. Caleb stayed behind, watching over the land and the people on it. "I want to come," Caleb said as Abram saddled his horse. "I know," Abram answered. "But staying, that's the braver choice." For 3 days they rode through cold winds and snow, finding burned camps and scattered toys. No bodies, no names, only hatred, carving a path through the wilderness. When they finally caught up, the man in gray waited at the edge of a cliff, rifle resting across his knees. "You lost," Abram called out. "I'm right where I mean to be." "Who are you?" "Just the one who'll teach your boy the world ain't kind." And before they could stop him, the man stepped off the edge, vanishing into the gorge below. They returned as the first real snow fell. Caleb opened the door, Matthew cradled in his arms, Ellie asleep by the hearth. For a moment, all was still. But Abram knew better. The West was never still for long. The winter hit hard. Snow stacked deep, winds howled at the eaves. But inside, warmth grew. A family formed, one that had nothing to do with blood and everything to do with choice. Ellie healed, little by little. Caleb read to her at night. Abram built her a bed. Matthew offered treasures only a toddler could give, buttons, carved sticks, bits of string. But darkness pressed close. Whisper spread of more wagons attacked, more families gone. And then the letter came. Abram stood in the cold, reading it twice before handing it to Caleb. "You should have let the boy be sold," it read. "Send him to Dry Creek, or we come take him. We don't come quiet." Abram drew in a slow breath. "What do we do?" Caleb asked. "We don't give him up," Abram said simply. Caleb didn't argue. He didn't need to. That night, 50 souls crowded into the Cutter barn, breaths steaming, hearts heavy. "They want my boy," Abram said, "and if we let them take him, it won't stop there." No one spoke at first. Then a woman stepped forward, voice shaking. "You think they'll come?" "Yes," Abram said. "They'll come, and we'll stand." "I don't reckon she'd have minded much," Abram said, voice low as he stared at the dark horizon. "Who wouldn't have minded?" Caleb asked softly. "Abigail, your ma." Abram cleared his throat. "No, I don't think she would have." The days that followed brought a change to the Cutter land. The place began to mend, piece by piece. The broken fences stood strong again. The barn no longer leaned with age, and a small schoolhouse took shape, its windows catching the morning sun. Folks who had come seeking shelter either settled or moved on, but each carried with them the memory of what they'd witnessed. That true courage wasn't born of rage or bullets, but of love and a will to protect what mattered. And right at the heart of it all, Abram Cutter became something he never thought possible: a father. He wasn't perfect. He kept quiet most times, and his smile was slow in coming. But when he saw Caleb tending to the fields or heard Matthew's laughter fill the porch, something deep inside him softened. The shadows of the past still lingered at the edges, but the light grew stronger. Each dawn, as the breeze carried the scent of pine and grass, Abram would close his eyes and whisper the same words. Thank you, Lord. Autumn turned the hills into a sea of red and gold. The chill came early, sharper than most years, frosting the windows before the sun could rise. Yet the land gave generously. Bushels of squash, tall stalks of corn, potatoes packed deep in the cellars that once had children from gunfire. Matthew grew quick, crawling fast enough to vanish in the blink of an eye. His laughter rang through the house, chased by Caleb's steady voice calling after him. Caleb, too, had grown, not just in height, but in purpose. He moved with surety, his shoulders squared, his eyes steady. He read in the evenings now, by the fire's glow, scriptures, tales of old kings, stories of trials and triumphs. When he wasn't reading, he was fixing fences, mending tools, lending a hand before the need was spoken. Abram often watched him, this boy who'd arrived with nothing but a baby in his arms and a will as strong as iron, the boy who called him Papa without hesitation, and who had filled the empty spaces of his heart. And at night, when the house was quiet, Abram would sit by the fire and speak softly to the dark. I didn't deserve them, he'd say, but I'll protect them as long as I draw breath. But peace on the frontier was never meant to last. One morning, Warren Tate rode in hard, his face set with worry. "Smoke," he said, breathless, "from the far ridge. Not ours." Abram didn't need to hear more. He grabbed his rifle. That evening, following tracks through the frostbitten brush, they found what was left, a burned wagon, a child's toy half buried in the dirt, blood splattered across the stones. They were hunted, Abram said quietly. By dawn, a girl appeared, no older than 14, her dress torn, one shoe lost, skin pale with cold. She collapsed into Warren's arms, and when she found her voice, spoke a man in a gray coat, boots tipped with iron. He said, "We didn't belong," she whispered. Said he'd make an example. Abram brought her inside, tended to her wounds, and decided they wouldn't wait for the storm to find them. They'd meet it head on. He rode out, gathering neighbors. Warren went for supplies. Caleb stayed, watching over what they had built. "I want to help," Caleb had said. "You are," Abram told him. "You're guarding home." 3 days they searched, through cold winds and falling snow, finding only the burned remains of those who come seeking hope. No bodies, only hate carved into land. When they found the man in gray, he waited at the cliff's edge. "You lost," Abram called. "I know exactly where I am," the man answered, eyes empty. "You got a name?" "Doesn't matter," the man said. "Just remember, I showed your boy the world isn't kind." And he stepped into the void, vanishing into the gorge below. The snow came heavy after that, covering the scars of battle. Inside, the cutter place was warm with new life. Ellie healed slowly, with Caleb reading beside her, Matthew bringing little treasures in his tiny hands. But the danger hadn't passed. A letter arrived, carried in secret. "You should have let the boy be sold. Send him to Dry Creek, or we come take him. We won't come quiet." Abram read it twice, then handed it to Caleb. "We won't give him up," he said. And Caleb nodded. No argument needed. That night, neighbors gathered. 50 souls packed into barn, breasts steaming in the cold. "They want him," Abram said. "But if we give him up, we lose more than a boy." The room fell quiet. "We can't hide him," someone said. "No," Abram answered. "We've hidden long enough. We stand." They prepared. Fences braced, traps set, rifles loaded. And 7 days later, they came. 12 men this time, moving through the dusk like wolves among sheep. But the cutter place was ready. The first to reach the house asked, "You cutter?" "I am." "We came for the boy." "You're not taking him. He's not your blood. What makes him yours?" Abram stepped down from the porch. "Because when he cried, I was there. When he needed arms, mine were open. When he had no name, I gave him one." "Then you'll die for him?" "Yes." And with that, the fight began. The battle was fierce. But this time the settlers fought with a strength that comes from defending home. One by one, the attackers fell, until only 2 fled into the dawn. Breath foggy in the cold, Caleb stood beside Abram. "They're gone," Caleb said. "For now," Abram replied. "But we'll be ready Later, around the fire, Abram pulled out a locket, silver, worn, holding a picture of Abigail. She would have liked you, he said. Would she have loved Matthew? She would have adored him. Caleb's voice softened. Then she'd be proud. The snow melted, slow and stubborn, and life returned. Green shoots pushed through scorched earth. Birds sang in the high branches. And word spread of what had happened. How a man stood for a boy not his own, and a town stood with him. And then came a letter, this time official. To Abram Cutter, guardianship granted, full and legal, of Caleb and Matthew. Both boys are now your sons under the law. Caleb blinked, the words sinking in. It's real. Abram smiled. It's real. In the chapel, Abram spoke before the neighbors. I didn't ask for these boys. I didn't earn them. But I choose them. Every day, every storm, they're mine and I'm theirs. And as the months passed, the Cutter place became more than a ranch. It became a home. When Abram carved Matthew's name beneath Caleb's on a barn post, he paused. What do you reckon your ma would say? Caleb smiled. She'd say, thank you. And Abram, for once, didn't have to say a word.